So imagine writing a book that teaches, like, 32 million people how to get rich.
Right, the ultimate dream scenario.
Yeah, but then, a few decades later, you publicly brag that you are $1 billion in debt. Like, proudly.
Which is just, I mean, it completely shatters the conventional image of a personal finance expert.
Oh, absolutely.
You expect the guy holding the map to wealth to be sitting on this mountain of unencumbered cash, not proudly leveraging $1 billion and telling the public, if I go bust, the bank goes bust. Not my problem.
It's wild. And that's not a hypothetical. That is literally Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah.
So today's deep dive is into the foundational concepts, and honestly, the massive, messy controversies surrounding Kiyosaki and Sharon Lecter's cultural juggernaut, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
It's a classic.
It is. And to do this, we are pulling from a pretty wide stack of sources. We have comprehensive book summaries, modern 2026 financial analysis from the Wealthy Action Plan blog.
Which is great, by the way.
Yeah, super insightful. We also have fierce critiques from personal finance gurus like Ramit Sethi and even actual bankruptcy reports from the American Bankruptcy Institute.
Because we have this incredible collision here between groundbreaking financial psychology and highly questionable real-world execution.
Right. And our mission is to sift through that wreckage, extract the undeniable nuggets of financial literacy for you, the listener, and separate the timeless wealth-building strategies from the advice that's maybe outdated or just plain dangerous.
There's definitely a lot of both.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how a financial guru ends up $1 billion in debt, we actually have to go back to the core paradigm shift that started it all. The Tale of Two Dads.
Yeah, the entire philosophy of the book stems from Kiyosaki contrasting two father figures from his childhood.
Right.
So his biological father, whom he calls the poor dad, was highly educated. He believed in scholastic achievement, climbing the corporate ladder, and seeking absolute job security.
The traditional path.
Exactly. And when faced with something expensive, his default automatic response was just, I can't afford it.
Which, shuts down the brain completely.
Right. It's a statement. It ends the thought process.
But his friend, Mike's father, the rich dad, didn't have all those academic degrees. He was an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And his default response wasn't a statement. It was a question. He would ask, how can I afford it?
Which forces the mind to work, right? It forces you to look for a solution.
Exactly. And that single shift is really the bedrock of the first major lesson we see in the sources.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that the poor and middle class work for money, while the rich have money work for them.
Escaping the rat race.
Yeah. The infamous rat race.
What's fascinating here is how the sources describe the psychological mechanics of that rat race. It's essentially this endless loop fueled by two fundamental human emotions, fear and desire.
Tell me more about that.
Well, first, you have the fear of not having money. That fear wakes you up, forces you into a commute, and keeps you at a job you might not even like just to pay the basic bills.
Right. And then, once you get that paycheck, the fear subsides for a minute and desire takes over.
Exactly. You see the new car, the bigger house, the nice vacation, you spend the money, the account drains, and bam, the fear kicks right back in.
It's a brutal cycle.
It is, and the book points out that increasing a salary often does absolutely nothing to stop this cycle. It just increases the scale of the spending.
Which is a phenomenon we now call lifestyle creep.
Right. It means that high-income earners, like surgeons, corporate executives, lawyers, they can still be entirely financially illiterate.
Wow.
Yeah, they make $500,000 a year, but they spend $500,000 a year. They are still trapped in the exact same psychological loop as someone making minimum wage.
That is terrifying. There's a hilarious but very telling anecdote from the summary about how Kiyosaki and his friend tried to escape this loop as kids.
Oh, the toothpaste tube.
Yes, they literally tried to make money by collecting empty lead toothpaste tubes, melting them down, and pouring the lead into plaster molds to forge nickels.
Which is just straight up counterfeiting.
A federal crime. But it shows a child's literal interpretation of wealth creation, right?
Yeah, making money, literally.
But the rich dad catches them, thankfully, and redirects that energy. He teaches them how to actually build a system.
This is a great part of the book.
They end up taking comic books that the local store was going to throw away, and they create a comic book lending library in a basement. They charge neighborhood kids admission to read as many as they want, hire another kid to manage the door.
And suddenly they were making money while they were at school.
Exactly.
They built an asset. Their money, or in this case, their system, was working for them. But to build those systems as an adult, You have to acquire financial literacy.
Right, which brings us to lesson 2.
Yeah, you have to understand the rule that made this book so famous. You must know the absolute mechanical difference between an asset and a liability.
The Kiyosaki definition is ruthlessly simple, isn't it?
Very simple. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket.
It sounds obvious when you say it like that.
It does, but then the book applies it to something very personal and basically kicks a hornet's nest. He claims that your primary house, the home you live in, is a liability, not an asset.
Oh man, yeah, that is the most controversial premise. Traditional financial advice always champions home ownership as, like, the ultimate foundation of wealth.
Always. But if you look at the actual monthly cash flow, a primary residence requires a mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and constant maintenance.
Right, water heaters break, roofs leak.
Exactly. It is actively pulling cash out of your pocket every single month.
So, buying a house is less like buying a gold bar and more like buying a treadmill.
A treadmill, I like that.
Yeah, because it feels like an investment in your future, but it requires constant energy and upkeep just to maintain it. It doesn't magically print cash while you sleep.
And if you lose your job tomorrow, your primary residence isn't going to generate income to buy your groceries. In fact,
Yeah.
the mortgage becomes a massive immediate threat to your survival.
That makes total sense when you frame it around cash flow.
The core argument is that the middle class buys liabilities. Expensive cars, big primary homes, boats thinking they are assets.
While the truly wealthy focus all their capital on acquiring true assets, things that generate passive cash flow, regardless of whether they punch a clock that day.
Exactly.
So if a primary residence is draining your cash, you need a new place to park your capital. And the sources argue that the biggest mistake people make here is confusing their day job with their actual wealth-building engine.
This is lesson 3, mind your own business. The book makes a really critical distinction between your profession and your business.
And to illustrate this, the sources bring up that brilliant story about Ray Kroc, right? The man who built McDonald's.
Oh, yeah. He's speaking to a group of MBA students at the University of Texas, and he asks them what business they think he's in.
And the students just laugh. They say, "You're in the burger business."
But Kroc says no. His profession is selling fast food franchises. His business is real estate.
Wait, realistic?
Yeah. The franchise owners sell the burgers to pay the rent on the land that Kroc's company owns. McDonald's is actually one of the largest real estate holders in the world.
That is mind-blowing. So your profession is how you fund your daily life. But your business is your asset column.
Exactly. It's the income-generating real estate, the dividend-paying stocks, the intellectual property you are quietly accumulating on the side.
And to conceptualize how you transition from one to the other, Kiyosaki introduces the cash flow quadrant. Let's break that down.
Sure, it's a cross with 4 letters. On the left side, you have E for employee and S for self-employed.
Oh.
But on the right side, you have B for big business and I for investor.
So what's the defining difference between the left and the right side?
It's all about the mechanics of leverage. People on the left side trade their personal time for money. An employee works for a system.
Right.
A self-employed person, like maybe a freelance graphic designer or a solo plumber, they are the system. If the plumber takes a month off, the income stops completely.
Because they're trading hours for dollars.
Exactly. They value security, but ironically, they are the most vulnerable to burnout, and they pay the absolute highest percentage in taxes.
So on the right side, the mechanics completely change, don't they?
They do. The B quadrant, the big business owner, creates or owns a system where other people do the work.
So if that plumber builds a company with 50 vans and hires a general manager, he can take a year off and still make money.
Precisely. And then the I quadrant, the investor, goes a step further and uses money to make money. They value freedom over security.
Right. They use other people's time, other people's money.
And crucially, they operate under an entirely different set of tax rules.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because lesson 4 dives deep into the history of those tax rules and the power of corporations.
It's a fascinating history.
The sources talk about how the 16th Amendment created permanent income taxation in the U.S. It was originally sold to the public as a Robin Hood philosophy.
Right, take from the rich, give to the poor.
Exactly. The politicians promised they were only going to tax the ultra-rich to fund the government. But the book argues this massively backfired on the middle class.
Because the wealthy didn't just accept the new rules, they analyzed the mechanics of the law.
Right.
Financial IQ is described as a combination of accounting, investing, understanding markets, and understanding the law. The wealthy realized they didn't have to earn money as individuals. They could earn money through the legal structure of corporations.
But how does that actually work in practice? If the system was allegedly designed to take from the rich, how do the policymakers get so thoroughly outsmarted? How does a corporate charter protect their wealth?
It all comes down to the order of operations in the tax code.
Okay.
An individual employee earns money, gets taxed on that earning immediately through payroll deductions, and then tries to survive on whatever is left over.
Earn, tax, spend.
Exactly. But a corporation operates in reverse. A corporation earns money, spends whatever it legally can on business expenses, travel, equipment, meals, vehicles, and is only taxed on the profit that remains.
Oh, wow. So earn, spend, tax.
Yes. So if a corporation earns $100,000 and reinvests $80,000 back into the business, it only pays taxes on $20,000.
Whereas an employee earning $100,000 pays taxes on the whole amount before they even see the check.
Right. And it's important to note, impartially, that it's not necessarily a sneaky, illegal loophole. It is the literal rulebook designed by governments to stimulate business growth and job creation. The wealthy just learn how to play the game on the right side of the quadrant.
That makes a lot of sense. But knowing the tax laws is only half the battle. To actually buy these assets and utilize these corporate structures, you need capital.
Which brings us to lesson 5.
Right, the rich invent money. A major premise of the book is that you don't necessarily earn that capital by saving pennies from your paycheck. You invent it, because wealth used to be defined by who owned the most physical land.
But today, wealth is defined by information and the courage to act on opportunities that others are too scared to touch.
The book uses Alexander Graham Bell to demonstrate this, right?
It does. He invented the telephone, but the mechanics of building a nationwide network were just overwhelming. So he went to Western Union, the massive telegraph monopoly, and offered them the patent for $100,000.
And Western Union laughed at him. They thought it was a toy.
Yeah, they rejected him completely.
But instead of giving up, Bell pushed past his inner critic, bravely gathered investors, built his own infrastructure, and created AT&T.
He essentially invented a multi-billion-dollar industry out of thin air because he saw the value of information when the establishment didn't.
And to develop that kind of vision, Lesson 6 emphasizes that you must work to learn, not work for money.
Right. The traditional advice is to seek a job with the highest starting salary. The wealthy mindset says to seek a job for the specific skills it will teach you.
So like seek work for the skills you'll acquire.
Exactly. If you master just one additional skill, like the management of cash flow, systems, or people, your lifetime income potential jumps exponentially.
But here's the thing. Even with all this financial IQ, even if you understand the tax code and assets versus liabilities, the sources acknowledge that people still fail.
They do, because of psychological obstacles.
Yeah, the book points out 5 main reasons why even financially literate people struggle. Fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and arrogance.
And the advice on how to overcome them is highly counterintuitive.
Very.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kiyosaki's philosophy aligns much more closely with Napoleon Hill's classic book, Think and Grow Rich, rather than a traditional budgeting manual.
Definitely.
For instance, to beat laziness, Kiyosaki suggests embracing a little greed.
Which goes against everything we are taught about being content,
It does, but his argument is that sitting on the couch saying, I don't care about money, is just a rationalization for laziness. A little bit of desire, wanting a better life, wanting freedom for your family, is the necessary fuel to get you off the couch and into the game.
Okay, I can see that. But then there's the advice on bad habits, which is wild. The book says the ultimate bad habit is paying everyone else before you pay yourself.
Ah, the pay yourself first principle.
Yes. The proposed solution is that the moment you get money, you put a percentage into your asset column investments, your business, before you pay your monthly bills.
This is one of the most heavily debated concepts in personal finance.
I mean, I have to push back on this. Wait, let me make sure I'm hearing this right. The advice is to deliberately shortchange your bill collectors.
Wow.
To take the money you owe the electric company or your landlord and put it into an index fund or a business venture, isn't that just a fast track to getting evicted and destroying your credit score?
That is the exact tension the book creates. The underlying psychological theory here is about leveraging artificial pressure.
Artificial pressure.
Yeah. If you pay yourself first and suddenly you are short on the rent, the pressure of those looming bills will put your back against the wall. That anxiety is supposed to force your financial genius to kick in.
So you're basically putting yourself in manufactured crisis.
Exactly. You will be forced to hustle, to invent a new way to generate that missing income rather than just settling for what you have.
Wow. But the difference between using artificial pressure to motivate yourself and simply acting with severe financial recklessness is a razor-thin line.
Oh, absolutely. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, deliberately ignoring bills can lead to a catastrophic spiral of late fees, high interest debt, and ruined credit.
Yeah, the theory sounds incredibly cinematic when you're reading it in a comfortable chair.
Mm.
But when we look at how this high-wire advice actually plays out in the real world, and specifically in the author's own life, the picture gets incredibly complicated.
Which brings us to the American Bankruptcy Institute report.
Yes, this is where theory meets reality. Because Rich Global LLC, which was one of Kiyosaki's main companies, filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy after losing a massive judgment in court.
It was for nearly $24 million.
And the irony is staggering. The company they lost to was the Learning Annex. These were the very people who helped make Rich Dad Poor Dad a global phenomenon. They booked Kiyosaki on massive speaking tours, got him on Oprah, put him on PBS.
They built his brand.
They did.
Yeah.
And the judge ruled that Kiyosaki's company failed to pay them their contractual share of the profits. But here's the crazy part. Kiyosaki's personal wealth, which Forbes estimated at around $80 million at the time, was completely untouched.
This is the real-world application of the corporate shielding we discussed earlier. He used the legal structure of Rich Global LLC to absorb the blow.
The ultimate corporate shield.
The company itself went bankrupt and was liquidated to satisfy the judgment, but the individual behind the company remained incredibly wealthy.
It's just wild to see it happen in real life.
Yeah.
But his relationship with debt gets even more extreme. You fast forward to 2024, and Kiyosaki publicly states on a podcast that he is $1 billion in debt.
And he uses it as a badge of honor.
He does. He justifies it by saying he uses debt to buy tangible assets like gold, silver, and Bitcoin, rather than saving cash, which he views as a depreciating asset due to inflation.
This raises an important question for anyone trying to implement his strategies. How much of this is brilliant, unconventional financial engineering, and how much is just reckless bravado?
Right.
Leveraging debt to acquire cash-flowing assets is a standard B&I quadrant strategy. But $1 billion in debt is an extreme, highly leveraged position that directly conflicts with almost every traditional view on financial stability.
And the broader financial community has not held back on their critiques. We looked at Ramit Sethi, who is a major personal finance expert.
He's on a Netflix show now, right?
Yeah, he does. And he completely unloads on the book. He points out a really uncomfortable undertone in Kiyosaki's writing, this pervasive vibe that poor people are just dumb or lazy.
Which is a heavy critique.
Sethi argues that the book completely ignores systemic poverty, generational barriers, and the reality of economic inequality.
Because a mindset shift is powerful, but a mindset alone doesn't magically fix a rigged system or overcome massive systemic hurdles. We have to report that impartially, but it's a very valid counterargument.
Absolutely. Sethi also highlights the profound danger of the specific tactics Kiyosaki casually throws out in the text. The book talks about making a killing in penny stocks, executing real estate deals with zero money down, or trading on insider information.
Yeah, for a beginner just starting out, pursuing those tactics without a deep, sophisticated understanding of risk management is like juggling dynamite.
Exactly. And the Wealthy Action Plan blog from 2026 brings this critique into an even sharper modern focus.
They really tear into his asset choices.
They argue that the book's intense obsession with physical, illiquid real estate is a trap in the modern economy. When the book was written in the late 90s, leverage was cheap and the housing market operated differently.
But in the economic climate of 2026, with fluctuating interest rates, massive maintenance costs, and unpredictable insurance markets, dumping all your capital into a single rental property is incredibly concentrated risk.
The blog points out that Kiyosaki notoriously hates diversification. He thinks it's for people who don't know what they're doing.
Which is a terrifying stance today.
Right. In a 2026 world where AI can disrupt an entire global industry in 6 months, putting all your eggs in one basket is a recipe for disaster. They argue you need the liquidity and broad exposure of index funds, REITs, and the tech sector to survive modern market volatility.
But Kiyosaki pushes his followers to dump traditional stock holdings entirely for extreme alternatives. He pivots heavily into survivalist economics, urging people to stockpile physical gold, silver, and crypto while dismissing the traditional stock market as a giant bubble.
So taking this book as total gospel is kind of like learning to drive from a Hollywood stunt driver.
That's a perfect analogy.
It's fantastic for learning how the engine works, understanding the physics of the car, and learning how to be absolutely fearless.
Yeah.
But you probably shouldn't try to drift your sedan through a grocery store parking lot on your first day behind the wheel.
You have to separate the physics from the stunt. The undeniable truth is that Kiyosaki correctly identified the foundational psychology of wealth. His definition of an asset versus a liability is a timeless masterpiece of financial literacy. It completely reframes how an individual views their monthly cash flow and their purchasing decisions.
But the execution, the stunts, are where things break down.
Precisely. His specific tactical advice lacks modern risk management. The principles of building passive income, utilizing tax codes legally, and acquiring financial education are non-negotiable if you want to build wealth. However, motivation and boldness simply cannot replace the need for genuine diversification, empathy for varying economic starting lines, and a sober mathematical assessment of debt.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating your own finances today? It means you have to be the CEO of your own financial education.
You're in charge.
You absolutely should take that foundational mindset shift from the book. Stop confusing liabilities with assets. Stop working purely for a paycheck and start building systems that work for you.
But you have to leave the extreme debt leveraging, the doomsday prepping, and the complete dismissal of diversification behind.
Right. You extract the framework, but you apply your own modern risk-adjusted tactics to fill it in.
Exactly.
And that leaves us with one final lingering thought based on these sources. The book makes a compelling case that the traditional school system completely ignores financial literacy by design. It trains us to be employees.
Which leaves us to rely on our parents, who likely only know the old rules of the rat race.
So if that's true, who is actually writing the financial rule book of the future?
We're moving rapidly toward a society where financial survival depends entirely on aggressive self-education. The safety nets are shrinking.
And if that's the case, what happens to the people who never get the memo? Are we moving toward a society where financial survival depends entirely on self-education? It brings us right back to that billionaire guru. If the guy holding the map is $1 billion in debt, maybe it's time we stop looking for a savior and learn to read the compass for ourselves.